King's College London, and my research interests predominantly lie in health organs. But recently I've become far more interested in pedagogy. I think part of that is moving to a more teaching intensive university. Also recently completed a fascinating critical PGC at Birkbeck, and I am also a trainee psychotherapist in person-centred and experiential approaches. And this is what I would like to talk to you about today. I'll share my email address in our Teams chat because I really welcome approaches. If you wish to have a chat about anything or to strike up new collaborations, I always welcome that. So thank you so much for coming along to hear me speak today. I'm going to open my slides now.
Marie, just so you know, when you get 5 minutes away, you'll hear the to let you know you've got 5 minutes left.
And it's 20 minutes I have, don't I?
Yes. Okay,
brilliant. Right, so this is the overview for today. It's really just a brief taster of Carl Rogers, of how the thoughts and theories of Carl Rogers may apply to education. We'll have a brief think about values, including our own values. I'll introduce some critiques of the person-centred approach, and towards the end, we'll have a discussion about the practical implications of what we've talked about today. So Carl Rogers, he may not need an introduction, of course. He is the founding father of humanistic psychology. And what is humanism and humanistic approaches? What is that all about? Well, in terms of humanistic psychology, in the mid-20th century, there was a sense that actually Freudian approaches to understanding the human condition have some limitations, as do the more behaviorist, the more Skinnerian type of black box, perhaps oversimplistic approaches to what it means to be human. And humanistic psychology at the time offered a novel understanding of personality, the notion that human beings are inherently good, and they are complex beings, and it is through a holistic approach that recognizes the importance of the role of human relationships that can help individuals reach their full potential. Humanists make the assumption that human nature is not predetermined and that the learner is an active agent. Therefore, humanist approaches, they underline the role of creativity, of empowering clients, or here we could apply this to students, recognizing the free will of our students and their potential. And through our work, and our work is done and enacted in a non-patriarchal way, so it's very much a relationship on equal terms of exchanging our human experiences. Therefore, the approach is non-pathologizing, and if we extend this to education, it's a lens that is a non-deficit lens. Therefore, we don't look at what's missing, but rather we celebrate that which is already there in all the richness of human experience. And Carl Rogers didn't just write about what is now known as person-centred or client-centred therapy. He also wrote a whole lot of really fascinating body of work on student-centred learning. Just a bit more about the prerequisites here when it comes to these humanistic approaches. And what I mean by the prerequisites, the ideal conditions for change to take place. So if we think of learning as a change process that students undergo, and also I urge you to think about the change processes that you guys undergo whilst teaching, what are the conditions in order for that change to take place? And Rogers is cited as saying, the only person who is educated is the one who has learned how to learn and change. So there's a process attached to learning how to change. And the necessary conditions include therapist-client relationship. So what kind of relationship do you have with your student? And, you know, of course, it's a professional relationship, but it's that relatedness of human experience. How does that demonstrate itself in the classroom? There needs to be a client incongruence. So if we think about the student, there is a sense of how the students perceive themselves and also a sense of where they want to be. And if there's an incongruence between the two, then that is a good prerequisite or a good condition for change. There's a kind of ideal self, if you like, and the current self. And the role of the tutor is to get the student to their ideal self. Therapist congruent, so the therapist, or again, we apply this to the tutor, needs to be committed to the teaching relationship. And they do so through demonstrating empathy, but also there's an authenticity there in how teaching is delivered. We could think about this in terms of a passion for our subject and a passion for teaching. Unconditional positive regard. So we could conceptualize this in terms of rewards and supporting students in using tools such as praise, positive feedback, and showing them areas for improvement rather than, again, pointing out the areas of deficit in a more punitive way. That's something that through this lens is to be avoided. And then client perception is important. So the students themselves need to be able to understand, if you like, that the relationship in the classroom matters, the teaching matters, and so does change. So they too are invested in this inevitable change process. Okay, so let's just think about education in a tiny bit more detail. Rogers is famed for this distinction between the cognitive learning and the experiential learning. So the cognitive stuff, according to Rogers, is more the kind of, you know, rote learning, the things that we memorize, but we don't quite absorb. Whereas learning through experience, and here, you know, toolkits approaches may include things like work-based portfolios, you know, reflective accounts. Those consist of personal involvement. There's also an argument there, using Rogers' lens, at self-initiated learning. So things like student-generated assignments, for instance, or student-generated content would play a part here. The extent to which the learner is given the opportunity to evaluate their own learning, okay, so to evaluate themselves. So in a way, they begin to embody what, if you like, that new ideal state of having attained, say, learning outcomes, what that might look like and whether or not they have achieved that. And experiential learning endures because it's something we live, it's a lived experience, and it's something that we embody. Significant learning is therefore enabled when the subject matter is relevant to the personal interests of the student. So here we think again about that authenticity in the classroom, the acceptance, the reward, and demonstrating empathetic understanding. So really, again, applying those principles taken from the world of talking therapies to the classroom and how we use them to teach. And here we're not in any way arguing that you should become psychotherapists. Not at all. That isn't part of our role. It's taking the human-centered values and enacting them through the way we teach is what we're arguing for here. So we move on to values. The really important one that underpins humanistic approaches is the assumption that all human beings have a self-actualizing tendency. I'm sure you're all sick of Maslow, so I shan't go there. But this idea that our basic motive is to fulfill our true potential. And this links back to theories of the organism, Kurt Goldstein's theory, for instance, that the organism, its role is to activate all its capacities. That's what it does. That is its aim. And once we have self-actualized, now, as I'm speaking, I want you to think about yourselves, because this isn't just about the student. Think about the role of the tutor here. Think about the work you do in pedagogy. If one has self-actualized, they have a comfortable acceptance of self and of others. They're reliant positively on their own experiences and are confident with their own judgment. There's a sense of agency and empowerment. And also we approach the day-to-day with a new appreciation, so with a fresh eye. So just for 2 minutes now, if you've got a piece of paper or just somewhere you can type, if we think about self-actualizing, we need to know what is our why. So why do we do this? Just for yourselves, just privately for 2 minutes, jot down, why do you do the work you do? Okay, just for 2 minutes. Okay, just bring you back now and we'll come back to that brief exercise. Very quick one about critique. So some critiques concern this notion of individual agency, that perhaps it ignores structural inequality. It individualizes issues. So when we think of socioeconomic deprivation, for instance, and we do know that our students can be disadvantaged, for instance, because of their previous education or situation, and they don't start off on a kind of, if you like, even level than perhaps some other students. So here, I guess Carl Rogers would argue about celebrating what is there and rewarding what is there and using those students' frame of reference rather than subjectively or judgmentally applying our own. So almost celebrating that people come from different contexts and what those different contexts can teach us. I've got a quote here from Paulo Freire. I'm sure you're aware of the pedagogy of the oppressed, but washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. And, you know, particularly important quote here when we think about the current Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, and how we are increasingly being called upon to act in a way which is socially just, not just in the classroom, but in our day-to-day lives. And then we think about Lincoln. I know some of you are in all kinds of institutions, I believe, but here's a tweet from university, excuse my language, a kind of worthwhile Twitter account to follow because it gets us to think. But, you know, we can see there's a discrepancy here. There's an uneven research space, and that, of course, then also plays into teaching resource and the extent to which we could do research-informed or research-led teaching also. Okay, so to finish up, I'd like to hear from you. So feel free to tell me how that exercise of writing down the why went for you. But it leads us to thinking about how we can actually apply person-centered teaching in the classroom. And you might want to tell me now about some of the opportunities or limitations of teaching online in this new normal. We've got the employability market rhetoric, for instance. Does that in some way actually undermine this alignment to student values and our own? How we nurture student experience. Scaffold, you probably know about Vygotsky scaffolding of proximal development and supporting students to develop and change, but only to the extent that it feels safe for them. But most importantly, you know, given the pressures we're under, ask yourselves, can you pour from an empty cup? you know, it's all well and good being student-centred, but we do know about things like compassion fatigue in nurses, for instance. So let me know now in this discussion for the next few minutes, to what extent do you think this is realistic? And are there any tools that you have used yourselves that you deem to be a good example of person-centeredness, and share that with the others? Thank you very much.